I'll never forget the day the world stopped. I mean, it didn't really stop, but it sure felt like it. It was December 1964, and I was just a kid, but I knew something big was happening. The movie Roustabout hit the theaters, and Elvis Presley was back on the big screen. I remember my dad's voice, full of excitement, as he told me, "This is the real deal, son. Elvis is back in his element." The film wasn't just a movie. It was a phenomenon. People lined up for hours, and the theaters were packed. I saw Elvis on the big screen, and it was like magic. He was the same Elvis who had electrified the world in the 1950s, but now he was in a different kind of movie. Roustabout was a musical, and it was packed with songs that made you want to dance in your seat. The critics weren't as thrilled as the fans. One review in the Monthly Film Bulletin called it a predictable mix of songs and slapstick. But who cared what they said? For us kids, and even for the grown-ups, it was about feeling that energy, that spark that only Elvis could bring. That year, Elvis was everywhere. He was in magazines, on the radio, and on TV. Mark Feeney, a writer for The American Scholar, said that Elvis's movies were like a glimpse into a world where the rules didn't apply. It was a world where a young man from Tupelo, Mississippi, could become a global icon. And he did it all with a smile, a swagger, and a voice that could melt the coldest heart. Elvis's music was changing too. Keith Flynn, who runs a website dedicated to Elvis's recording sessions, says that the songs from this period were a mix of rock and roll, country, and even a bit of soul. I remember listening to the radio and hearing songs like Roustabout and The Next Step Is Love. They were different from his early hits, but they still had that unmistakable Elvis touch. The critics kept saying that Elvis was past his prime, but the numbers told a different story. The Los Angeles Times reported that Elvis's financial take was soaring, and he was still one of the biggest box office draws in Hollywood. People couldn't get enough of him. His movies, like Girl Happy and Tickle Me, were fun, light, and full of music. They weren't deep, but they made you feel good. I remember going to see Girl Happy with my friends. It was a sunny day, and we were all hyped up. The movie was about Elvis playing a rock and roll star, who falls in love with a girl he meets on a beach. It was pure escapism, and we loved every minute of it. The songs were catchy, and Elvis's performance was charismatic. He could make a simple song sound like the greatest thing you'd ever heard, but it wasn't just the movies. Elvis was also making some of the best music of his career. The singles were hitting the charts, and his albums were selling like hotcakes. One of my favorites was Paradise Hawaiian Style. It was a mix of upbeat rock and roll and smooth ballads, and it showed that Elvis could do it all. The critics might have been skeptical, but the fans knew the truth. Elvis was still the king. As the years went on, Elvis's movies became more ambitious. Speedway was a big-budget film that showed Elvis in a different light. He played a race car driver, and the action was intense. It wasn't just about the music anymore. It was about the story and the performance. Critics like Renata Adler from the New York Times were impressed. She wrote that Elvis was not better than ever, but better. Elvis's music was evolving too. He was experimenting with different genres, and it was exciting. The album From Elvis in Memphis was a game changer. It was a mix of soul, country, and rock, and it showed that Elvis was still a force to be reckoned with. Critics like Pete Johnson from the Los Angeles Times were raving about it. He said that Elvis's voice was as powerful as ever. By the time Elvis hit the stage in Las Vegas in 1969, he was a different artist. He was no longer just a rock and roll star. He was a legend. The shows were electric and the crowds were wild. Elvis was back and he was better than ever. The New York Times called him the king of rock and roll, and it was hard to argue with that, but the journey wasn't always easy. There were ups and downs, and Elvis faced his share of challenges. The critics were always there, ready to tear him down, but through it all, Elvis stayed true to himself. He kept making music and movies that made people happy, and that's what really mattered. As I look back on those years, I realized that Elvis wasn't just a singer or an actor. He was a symbol of something bigger. He was a symbol of hope, of joy, and of the power of music to bring people together. And even though the world has changed, that spirit lives on. Elvis may be gone, but his legacy is still with us. And for me, that's what really counts. Elvis Presley's life was a roller coaster of amazing highs and deep lows. As I look back, I can't help but feel a mix of awe and sadness. His journey from a poor kid in Mississippi to the king of rock and roll is nothing short of incredible, but it wasn't all glitter and gold. In the early 1970s, Elvis was still performing and making music, but things were changing. His shows at the Forum in Los Angeles in 1970 were a huge success, with fans packing the venue. But by the mid-1970s, people started to notice changes in Elvis. He was gaining weight, and his performances weren't as energetic as before. Some critics, like Don Heckman from the New York Times, even wondered if Elvis had become more of a crooner than a rocker. Despite the changes, Elvis still had a massive following. His fans were loyal, and they would do anything to see him perform. In 1973, Elvis did a special show called Aloha from Hawaii, which was broadcast globally. It was a huge event, with over 1 billion people tuning in. But even then, some critics, like John Landau from Rolling Stone, felt that Elvis was relying too much on his past glory. Elvis's health started to decline, and he was hospitalized several times. In 1974, he was admitted to a hospital in Memphis due to pneumonia. People were worried, but he always seemed to bounce back. However, the strain was taking a toll. By 1975, Elvis was 40 years old, and the media was starting to talk about his weight and his health. He was no longer the young, energetic performer he once was. Despite the challenges, Elvis continued to make music and perform. His album Today was released in 1975, and critics like Dave Marsh from Rolling Stone gave it a mixed review. Some praised his efforts, while others felt he was just riding on his past success. In 1976, Elvis's performances were still drawing crowds, but the reviews were mixed. Some fans were still moved by his shows, while others noticed a decline in his energy and appearance. On August 16, 1977, the world was shocked to learn that Elvis Presley had died at his home, Graceland, in Memphis, Tennessee. He was only 42 years old. The news sent waves of grief around the world. People couldn't believe that the king of rock and roll was gone. His death was a turning point, and it marked the end of an era. But even in death, Elvis's legacy lived on. His music continued to inspire new generations, and his fans kept his memory alive. Over the years, people have written books, made documentaries, and even visited Graceland to pay their respects. Elvis's impact on music and culture is undeniable. He changed the face of rock and roll, and left a lasting mark on the world. Today, when I listen to Elvis's music, I hear more than just the songs. I hear the story of a man who rose from humble beginnings to become a legend. I hear the passion, the struggle, and the enduring spirit that made him the king. Even though he's gone, his music will always be here, reminding us of the incredible journey of Elvis Presley.